Hello and welcome back to the She Lives Purposefully podcast. My name is Megan Edmonds and I am the host of this show. I am so thankful that you're here, so honored that you're here, that we get to spend this time together talking about living purposefully, living for Jesus in multiple different areas of life, week in and week out. Today we are talking about being on guard, resisting the devil, and why that's so important, specifically how resisting him or really not resisting him and kind of falling into temptation actually leads to us being driven away from what God does have for us. Okay, so I'll start with a story and then we'll really jump into this episode. The other day, I went to a mom coffee house thing, and I'm so curious to see if the host is going to listen to this episode and what I'm going to say. But we went to this with a friend of mine. We went to this mom coffee house thing. It was super cute. This mom hosted a bunch of other moms and their kids at her house, and she made different like specialty coffee drinks and just had snacks and had this really beautiful home and this great backyard, all childproof. It was so awesome. And it was this kind of moment for me where really quickly I felt the envy and covetousness come in and enter. The aesthetic of her home was so cute. It was so clean. They had such a great backyard, playground in the backyard, all the things. And she's just such a cute person as well. But instead, and it was actually really transformative for me, I had this, kind of consciously, almost subconsciously too, pivot in my mind where I decided, you know what, I'm going to go instead for a heart of thankfulness. And the Lord had, kind of provided this space for me to befriend other moms and like have this time and have this really good coffee and all that kind of idea. And here is why that pivot is so important. Something like envy can make you so discontent and so covetous, and it can also make you completely unhappy with where the Lord has placed you, with the things the Lord has given you, and even ill-willed or, having this bitter mentality towards those who have the things that you are envious of. And that can apply to so many things, of course, relationships, kids, maybe it's the job, maybe it's success, whatever that may look like, hobbies that people can afford, or, whatever that is. But we then start to feel like, how did this girl, how can I, get what she has, what the Lord has given her, the Lord has blessed her, and then you want that blessing, or you're just like, she has this blessing, I want it too, as if she stole your blessing. And so envy is such a dangerous thing, and it, like so many other sins, pulls us from where God has us and what he has for us into this unknown, ill-willed, bitter place of seeking things that he has for other people that he might have for us too, or maybe he doesn't. And again, this happens with so many other sins as well. But Satan, the whole point of this story is that Satan is so quick and so sneaky to get those mentalities, those thoughts, those sins, those desires, those discouragements into our hearts and minds and totally kind of sway us from where the Lord has us. Now, this whole episode is not to stir up fear about what Satan can do in our hearts and minds, but rather to encourage you and encourage and exhort myself to be on guard and know that we do, as Christians, have the power of Christ in us to flee temptation, to resist the devil and all of his traps and snares, all the things. We will dive into how to do just that. And again, the importance of doing that, of being on guard. All right, before we jump into the rest of this episode, I do just want to say, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the She Lives Purposely podcast and to leave a rating or review, share these episodes with your friends, and to listen week in and week out to soak in all of what I hope is encouragement in this space. You listening, you sharing with friends, you rating and reviewing so that other women on the algorithms can find the show and see if it encourages them as well is so helpful. So thank you for doing that. Also, I did want to say too, I almost just forgot, but I did something new this week with my toddler. I did like a toddler devo time, quiet time, Jesus time, whatever you want to call it. I've seen these throughout Instagram, just creative people. Tara Sun Snyder is one of them who has put together her own basket for this purpose. And so I put together a basket for my toddler to do a toddler devo time. And this week we put on worship music. We read different books, including, a baby's Bible version, toddler Bible version. And we also had a worship dance party, and we've been doing that for a couple days now. It's been really, really sweet. And I posted about this on Instagram. And a lot of moms in our community were really into this idea. And so I put together for you kind of a guide. Just basically, one is a list of things that we actually do have that are in the basket that I'm using. Two is things that I am looking to add to this basket, this Devo time. And three is other ideas for kind of older kids for that Devo time for them. So I'm going to link that in the show notes. And I also, believe it or not, so crazy, but 'tis the season, have put together a Christian Living Christmas gift guide for you of just all these things that I really love. A mix of Daily Grace Co., Hosanna Revival, Amazon, different shops from friends that I have, things like that. And we'll link that as well in case you are already in the shopping spirit as I am. So I'm going to link that for you as well. Okay, the Bible tells us that Satan prowls. He is scouring the earth, prowling the earth, looking for his next victim. To do what? To steal, kill, and destroy. That is the end goal of everything that he entices us into. His ways, which are opposite of God's ways, lead into that. They lead into death and destruction. And it sounds like, okay, of course, that's not something that I want to jump into. I don't want to be trapped into that. Of course, it's going to be easy to resist things like that are so heavy to lead to death and destruction. But actually, I feel like it's really easy, as in the story I just told, for us as believers to get enticed into those things, to run even into those things, or to fall into those traps. I have a list here of different things that this could entail for all of us. And so maybe one of these things, or all of these things, or many of these things, stick out to you as different things that you struggle with. All right. So it could be envy, could be lust, it could be discouragement, ungratefulness, bitterness and unforgiveness, judginess, hate, laziness and slothfulness, and so many other things. And maybe you can't relate to me whatsoever, but I feel like these things come up on the regular for so many Christians, for all of us to be aware of and resisting every single day. Instead, and I have this in a list form too, this is what God has for us. He has contentment, joy, love, encouragement, hope, thankfulness, redemption, restoration, forgiveness, peace, kindness, self-control, being filled with the Spirit, community, so many different things, patience, and so on. And living that way, living God's way, leads us into more of that path that He wants us to go down, people that He wants us to meet, being transformed and renewed by Him, being healed inside out by Him, all of these beautiful things. And this isn't like a prosperity gospel message. You guys know that that is not my thing. It's something that I do disagree with, but this is truth. This is what God has for us. And it doesn't mean that life is going to be easy, but it does mean that life with Christ has all of these things. And this is why we need to resist the devil, because even in those things, our pet sins, maybe the things that come up in the day to day, or maybe they come up once in a while and they're kind of bigger deals to us, but we fall into them. They lead to death and destruction. And that's one option that we have. But we also have this other option of a life with Christ, and it is life and life abundant. And so we have to be resisting the devil. And how do we do that? It can happen first with our actions, of course, and kind of stopping that right from the get-go. We see sin and we're like, absolutely not, that's not for me, kind of idea. Or maybe we even see temptation and we're like, no, I'm fleeing that. And that is so awesome. But I do think we have to take it even a level deeper than just saying no to sin, running from temptation. And those things are so vital. and, literally biblical, flee temptation and not to sin and to obey Christ. But a lot of that happens first in our hearts and in our minds. If an opportunity presents itself to be gossipy and judgy, and I have not been guarding my heart, I have not been spending time with Jesus, I have not been, seeing like why that is wrong or anything like that, it's going to be a lot harder to resist that temptation and say no to sin in that moment than if I had been all the while, even when temptation wasn't there, guarding my heart and my mind. And so that is why it is so important to be on guard to resist the devil. And now I just want to talk about how we actually do that. How do we actually be on guard? How do we guard our hearts and minds and not fall into the traps of the devil, but instead walk in the light? The first thing, and it's going to sound so basic, but it's actually just to know God's way. And this sounds basic, but it's so vital. It's so important. And I think sometimes a lot of people, a lot of Christians kind of jump over this and pass it. And they're like, how do I know what God wants me to do? Does he want me to do this or not do this? And it's important for us to know from the get-go, what does God want? And he tells us explicitly so often about so many things in his word, what he has for us, what he does not have for us, what is the way of life and light, and what is the way of darkness, death, and destruction. And so it's so important to be in the word, to grow in the knowledge of God, to be spending time with him, to be praying, to be, becoming more in tune with the Spirit. And that happens by reading his word, by praying, by worshiping, by knowing him more and more, by, growing that relationship more and more. So that's number one. And, again, very core of that is actually spending time in God's word and learning what are the things that he says are not just things that we shouldn't be doing and staying away from, but instead, what are the alternatives? What are things that I should be running to and diving into? And I think this is a whole other tangent, but such a common thing is sometimes we remove sin from our lives, but we don't fill it with anything new. And so here's this hole ready for either that sin to return or more other sins to return, different temptations, things like that. But we need to fill it with things that are good and true and honorable. Instead of just removing something, let's fill it with the things of God. And so it's important to know what are the things of God, what are the things that he wants us to actually be stepping into, and also, of course, the things that he calls us to say no to resist, to run from. But, also, again, things that he actually wants us to walk in. Another big one that I think is also something that a lot of us kind of gloss over is knowing yourself, know thyself. And I'm not here to, dive into why, I don't know, you should go to therapy or this or that. And I'm a big fan personally of Christian counseling and all of that. But what I will say is, it is so important to know yourself, know the things that you are naturally inclined to do, know the temptations that have the biggest pull for you, the things that maybe you're like, actually, that's not really a big pull for me at all, to be honest. So, of course, it's important to be on guard for all of those things because all of those things could pop up. Maybe one day randomly you're tempted in a way that you never have been before. Of course, like that's totally a possibility, but it's also so important to know, you know what? This is something that I fall into time and time again, or this is something that I'm tempted by time and time again, or something that resonates with me that is so enticing, or I'm just catching myself in all the time. Know those things and allow yourself, I think, to focus on those things, not on those things necessarily, but like on how to guard yourself against those things, how to set up boundaries for those things. Let's go back to the gossiping, like have a group that is super gossipy that you hang out with, maybe knowing beforehand, this is how I'm going to get out of that situation, how I'm going to pivot the conversation, or you know what? I know myself, I can't hang out today. I can't do that today. That's not something that I'm going to step into because I know I'm going to fall into that. And then it applies to so many things. And I want to say too, sometimes it can feel weak and it can feel hard to fess up to yourself and to say, you know what? Yeah, I struggle with that. And you know what? I don't feel like I can conquer that in my own strength. I don't feel like I can because I have fallen time and time again. And I want to say to you, you can with the power of Christ in you. You absolutely can conquer those things. Knowing and saying out loud to yourself, maybe to somebody else who can keep you accountable, this is something that I struggle with actively. Knowing that, saying that is so powerful. It is so honest. And I think it is a huge, great step in one, denying sin, but also being on guard and saying, okay, now I'm even more prepared. I'm even more prepared to be on guard, to maybe even dive into, okay, why is this sin so trippy for me? Why is it actually destructive and bad? So maybe that is a switch in my brain too. Like, I want to stop gossiping because it is so destructive and bad. And this is why, things like that. So I think it's so powerful to actually fess up to these things and say, you know what? This is a big struggle for me. Because I think it allows us to then be better prepared for future temptation and to be on guard. Okay, this one kind of ties into the first thing that we were talking about, but spend time with God because God is truly the only one that can change you. Time with God transforms. And yes, I will say we as believers, as Christians, as people have a responsibility for our own actions. When we fall into sin or maybe not fall, like I said earlier, maybe we run headfirst into sin. We can't say like, you know what? That's because God didn't give me the strength in that situation. No. We have a responsibility for our own actions. Yes, 100%. But it is the power of Christ in us that allows us to conquer these things and that actually does transformative work inside of us, that frees us from chains, that allows us to see the destruction that sin can cause. It completely transforms us, renews us. He completely transforms us and renews us from the inside out. He makes us new. Doesn't mean we're never going to sin again. No, but it does mean that He is at work in us, that He promises to complete the good work that He began. And with all of that said, that He is the one that does those things. He is the one that transforms. And so spend time with Him, spend time with God, because time with God does that transformation work. And this might sound kind of weird at first, but hear me out in all of this. Another thing that I think helps us to be on guard is practice. Now, I'm not saying, enter situations that are ultra tempting for you. If there's a party where there's people you want to hook up with or you want to get drunk at or whatever, I'm not saying go to the party and practice self-control or whatever. I would avoid the party. That's my recommendation. But I will say that there are going to be opportunities that arise, situations that arise that maybe you are placed in. Maybe it's not, unwise for you to go, but you just know maybe might be a little hard, things like that. Going back again to a gossipy friend group and saying like, okay, here I am. These are believers that I'm going to be meeting with, but I know that this might be a tempting situation for me, something like that. Sometimes, yes, fleeing that 100%, flee the temptation is the best route available. There are times when fleeing temptation is always an option. I'm not going to say, I'm not trying to say it's not. There are times when maybe, for instance, you're at a work event and you are meeting with different people at a lunch table and all of a sudden they're gossiping. It's not like you entered that situation, you know what I mean? But here now, the situation has presented itself to you. Now, this is what I'm saying in the practice kind of scenario, is that in that moment, this is your opportunity to say, okay, now that you have known thyself, now that you've been spending time with God, now that you know His ways versus ways that are of Satan and destructive, you can say, all right, now I'm going to put into practice the things that I have been working on in my heart and in my mind. And my encouragement to you would be to flee that temptation, to shut down that sin, but also to move in the opposite direction of that, which is kind of like running away from that situation. So, for example, if you know that you're going to, I don't know, a work event where there is somebody that is so hard for you to love. It just is. We're not going to talk about why. It just feels like it's hard for you to love that person. In this situation, I think what you could do in practicing this and kind of living this out is thinking of ways and then acting out ways to actively love this person at this work event. Does it look like getting a drink for them? And I'm just saying, club soda or whatever. Does it look like, including them in a conversation? Does it look like being out of your way, going out of your way to just, start a conversation, say, hi, how are you doing? I hope, I don't know, your family's doing well, things like that. But going out of your way to not just say, okay, I'm not gonna, interact with this person. Sometimes that's what you gotta do. But to not just do that, but to instead also say, okay, I'm shutting down this sin. I'm gonna be on guard for things that can creep up and cause me to not want to love this person. And instead, I'm going to choose to actively love them and pursue love in this situation right now, because I think that also helps me then to be even further from the sin, further from hating this person, further from not loving. And the same thing applies to like the gossip situation. I'm actually going to bring up an encouraging conversation is 12 steps further from gossiping than just choosing to stay silent. And I'm not adding choosing to stay silent. That's often a route that I'll take, but I'm just saying that choosing a positive conversation is taking it even a step further. And so that is my encouragement. I guess practice is kind of a weird way to say that, but we're going to stick to it. Practice shutting down the sin, practice the being on guard that you have been working on, and practice actually going in the opposite direction and choosing to, for example, love when you feel like it's really hard to love at all. All right, friend, thank you so much for listening to the show. I hope this was an encouragement for you, that you felt like, you know what? Absolutely. It is time for me, if I haven't been, to be resisting the devil. And maybe you have been and you're like, you know what? This is just an extra stirring up of like, I need to be extra on guard. I need to be on guard on things that I know are easy for me to fall into. And maybe even things that I know are not necessarily for me or are easy for me to fall into, but I know that I could, and all of those kind of things. I hope that this was an exhortation for you to live for Jesus in your everyday life. Friend, again, thank you so much for listening to the show. I love you. Live purposefully and live for Jesus. See ya.